Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings be upon all of you folks tuning in on our Zoom call and later on Facebook in the coming days. I pray that this day is full of light and goodness, health and justice for you and our communities. We are having an incredible and important conversation today as part of the American Muslim Appreciation and Awareness Month political education programming. The conversation today is titled Abolition and Justice. August, for those that don't know, has been designated as American Muslim Appreciation and Awareness Month for the past 5 years, for the last 5 consecutive years. And we want to take advantage of that visibility in California to bring to the forefront of our community's consciousness, conversations that speak to the moral conscience of our community, conversations that speak to the necessary justice that we are desperately in need of, and conversations that we are demanding, conversations and also essentially movements that we are demanding be respected and valued and cemented as part of the narrative of our community. Conversations that I think Dr. Angela Davis has said about that they are the continuation of the justice work of past organizers and teachers and activists and revolutionary fighters. So I pray that this conversation, this short conversation, is full of light and love and learning and unlearning, and that it inspires deepened belonging, service to one another, hope and justice. Ameen. I want to take this time also to introduce our panelists. We are joined by some powerhouse folks, Pastor Ben McBride, co-director of PICO, California. He was recently named by the Center for American Progress as the 2020 faith leader to watch out for. So show Pastor Ben some love, y'all. He is someone that serves as a national leader with the expertise in reconstructing public safety systems, gun violence prevention, faith-based community organizing, and equity, diversity, and inclusion training through the organization that he leads called the Empower Initiative. Pastor Ben founded the Bringing the Heat campaign, which is a peace-making initiative to address police violence, and serves as the co-chair of California's Racial and Identity Profiling Advisory Board, focusing on ending racial profiling in California. We are also in community here on this call with Sister Hazel Gomez, who is a nationally recognized leader and community organizer. Sister Hazel organizes with the Live Free Detroit Coalition, part of a national campaign of faith and action to build a safer and freer Detroit. She is an organizing advisor at Dream of Detroit. She is the education co-chair of Believers Bailout. And if folks don't know what Believers Bailout is, it is a community-led effort to bail out Muslims in pretrial incarceration and ICE custody. Their work really addresses 3 areas: the prison industrial complex, anti-Muslim racism, and anti-Blackness in our communities. Sister Hazel also serves as a curriculum developer and trainer and mentor with the Muslim Power Building Project. And she is a student of the Islamic Sciences through Rabat's academic program and seminary under the tutelage of Sheikh Tamara Gray and other Muslim women scholars. Finally, we are joined by Brother Tyson Amir, and these are not my words. This is from the bio page. He is a rapper blessed with a poignant message, electrifying cadence, enlightening lyrics, and it all combines to form a music with enough heart and soul to move a generation. And I've got his book right here, and man, his words and his organizing and his music has moved a lot of people over the years. He is a poet, an MC, an educator, an author, an activist, and a freedom fighter. His fight is born out of a love for humanity, a love for justice and peace for all. Each one of these layers are intricately woven into his praxis and practice. His most recent work, the Black Boy Poems curriculum, is the first of its kind. It's a true combination of culturally relevant content, pedagogy, and hip hop pedagogy, which allows 21st century learners to see themselves in the learning experience. Brother Tyson combines his experience surviving America as a Black man with hip hop prose and original analysis to shape what is arguably the most revolutionary statement of the 21st century. I'm going to be posting these folks' bios and some of their work in the comments. So I really hope that you can check in with these folks after we're done with this call, so that this relationship is not a relationship that you come to just for learning and then you dip out and never sort of engage with the work. We want to have these conversations in the coming weeks, in the coming months, and throughout our lifetimes, because this work is a commitment of a lifetime. So these three folks, y'all, are people that make up this beautiful fight that is born out of a deep love for people and for justice in our communities. And when I think of the statement by the Deputy Chairman, Fred Hampton, may he rest in peace, he says, "I'm going to die for the people because I'm going to live for the people. And I'm going to live for the people because I love the people." When I think of that kind of energy and that kind of compassion, man, that's y'all. That's Pastor Ben. That's Sister Hazel. And that's Brother Tyson Amir. Y'all are among those folks. So I'm honored to be in y'all's company today and to talk through abolition and justice with all of you. I want to also take I've been yapping away, but because this conversation and these struggles are connected, I want to begin this program with a moment of silence and an acknowledgement to remember that wherever we may be watching or tuning in to this program, to this video, we are on indigenous lands here in the Americas. And I want to take this time to remember the deep connection that indigenous peoples have to the lands. And I want to give thanks to them for allowing us to live and to work and to learn and to pray on their traditional homelands. I myself am on Mwekma Ohlone land, and I offer my respects to the indigenous elders and peoples here and across the Americas, both past and present, and I invite you to do the same. During this moment of silence, y'all, I want to ask you to pay homage to the Black elders and teachers and freedom fighters and organizers, those named and those nameless, that labored and dared to imagine a freer life and a more just society for generations of people. Let us remember Elijah McClain, Robert Fuller, Malcolm Hirsch, Stephen Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Shukriya Abdi, Tony McDade, Stephon Clark, Nina Pop, Dominique Fells, Rhea Milton, Eric Salgado, Kyla Moore, Sean Monterosa, and the many others whose names have not been mentioned on this call. Let us remember their names, their stories, their innocence, their humanity, and commit ourselves to their justice. Let's take that moment now. Thank you, y'all. This program was sponsored and is sponsored by Black Boy Poems, Brother Tyson Amir, Believers Bailout, whose sister Hazel is representing, PICO, California, who Pastor Ben is representing, also the Yassine Foundation, the Lighthouse Mosque, the West Valley Muslim Association, and I was really hoping that this program would go live through their Facebook pages. Masjid Rahman also in Richmond, I was really hoping that this program would go live through their Facebook pages. That way, these various communities and their following can really engage with this really important sort of conversation that addresses this moment. So I welcome those who are on the Zoom call, and I pray this conversation is fulfilling for you, and that it pushes you to be uncomfortable. I want to urge you to essentially put any questions that you may be having in the chat, and we'll get to it as we have this conversation and also through our Q&A session at the end. I have been talking for a while. I got questions for y'all now. The community has questions, but I want to start off with how are you? How are you, Pastor Ben? How are you, Sister Hazel? How are you, Brother Tyson Amir? And we'll start off with Pastor Ben.
Well, greetings. I want to say assalamu alaikum to all the Muslim relatives. Count it a blessing and honor to to be on here as your brother, somebody that is struggling alongside you to try to figure out how to create a different world. How am I? You know, I think I am not doing well. I think I'm deeply troubled by like the state of where we are right now, deeply troubled by the way in which explicit white nationalist racism is permeating the conversation and the culture, and deeply concerned about the ways in which our loved ones who have already been living on the underside of this imperial system are experiencing that pain more acutely. And so the neighborhood that I'll go back to tonight in East Oakland, where I live, you know, they was catching hell under Obama, and they've been catching hell under Trump. And so I'm concerned about them and concerned about all of us. So I don't think I'm doing well. I think I feel levels of grief around where we are. But I am not overcome with grief because I know we serve the Most High, who gives us power and agency. So, but I'm glad to be here, and I feel strength from seeing Sister Hazel, seeing Brother Tyson, seeing you, Brother Osama. So I feel strength and feel hope in that.
Thank you, Pastor Ben. I appreciate you. Sister Hazel, how are you?
You know, subhanAllah, you know, peace and blessings, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here in community with each of you. How am I doing? You know, the uncertainty of everything happening is both, it's a blessing, but it's also super difficult. Like, we live our lives in uncertainty. And honestly, the Rona has really like exacerbated all that. And so for me, you know, for these last few months, it's just really been how all these systems have all the issues already that has already been within our society. The coronavirus and COVID-19 has just exacerbated everything. And so I'm grateful that people are seeing that, but I'm also, you know, as hopeful and grateful as I am, I also want to push individuals who just want to be in their own silos, right? So for me, it's a hopeful time, hopefully, right? Like, despair is satanic, and I don't want to inculcate that despair. And so I'm just really praying and hoping that being in community with each of you and all the viewers as well, that inshallah, it'll be a way to learn and grow with one another.
Inshallah. Thank you, Sister Hazel. And Brother Tyson Amir, how are you?
Appreciate it, bro. I'm very thankful for this opportunity that we have here. It's good to see Pastor Ben. Haven't seen you in a while. Now we Zoom screen to screen. And Sister Hazel, I don't know, maybe we've met before. I'm not sure if we have, but it's good to see you as well. And you know, peace and blessings, greetings. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. The revolutionary ancestors that I come from would say, you know, power to the people, all power to the people, in order to start something off like this. So I want all of that to be in this space. And that's a very real thing for us to be thinking about. And I'm sure that's going to be part of our conversation. And so, as Pastor Ben was saying, like you posted the book a little earlier. I wrote the book during the Obama administration. And so the critical analysis that I was trying to demonstrate in the text then is as relevant now as it was in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s and the 60s. We can say in the 1800s and the 1700s. I mean, the conditions in many ways have been the same when we look at them or we examine them fundamentally. And so for the community that I come from, it's very difficult for me to even have a personal assessment of how I am doing, because I think so much about how are my people doing and what can I be doing for that as a strategy and as a survival mechanism. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm here, I'm healthy, I haven't been negatively impacted in a personal way and like my biological state by coronavirus or COVID-19. So I'm here. And because of that, there's a responsibility to do something, not just for myself, but for the sake of my community, for the freedom and liberation of the people. And I believe that's a beautiful responsibility to have. That's an honorable and a righteous responsibility to have. And I want to do everything that I can in my power to manifest that to the best of my ability with the time that I have.
Ameen. Ameen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring justice and liberation through your work and through all of y'all's work. because our people need it. And we have been struggling for a long time, both inside of this country and outside of it, because this struggle has been an international phenomenon. These struggles have been international phenomenons. It's the work of the prophets and the righteous and the many that have come before us. So I want to get right into this conversation. Can y'all talk briefly to this moment? And I begin with a statement by Dr. Angela Davis. She said this recently. She said that this moment, this particular historical conjuncture, holds possibilities for change that we've never before experienced in this country. Would you agree? And I want to start off with Brother Tyson, Amir.
It's a good question. I don't necessarily disagree because of the revolutionary tradition or the lineage that I've come from. My father, he considered himself a member of the Black Panther Party in Oak Park, Sacramento. So joining it there. And then when he and my mother eventually moved to the Bay Area, being connected to the various formations that existed here, one of the things that came through that, though, from the elders to the generation that I represent, was this idea that the conditions always exist for revolutionary change. It's a matter of being able to recognize them and then utilize them in that time and place to, as I was saying earlier, all power to the people, the power to the people to be able to mobilize the people. And what we're seeing happening right now can be a reflection of that, but at the same time, no. And I think this is something that our conversation will address. What are people being mobilized to do? Are people being mobilized to address some of these superficial or symptoms of the systemic reality that we have been dealing with historically and in a contemporary moment? Or are people being mobilized to really address those root causes and tear down that institution, tear down that machine, and then rebuild something else in its place that's going to be based in freedom and liberation, justice, equality for the people? And so if that's the case, then yeah, for sure, this is a deep, very important historic moment. If not, then, you know, it is what it is and it's going to pass. And then hopefully people will be able to utilize those conditions that exist to mobilize people for those real causes of change that we want to see.
Thank you for that. Sister Hazel, would you agree? Does this moment, this historical conjuncture, hold possibilities that we've never seen before in this country?
You know, subhanAllah, I wanted to start off with the prayer of Moses. Moses, peace be upon him, before he was going to go and speak with Pharaoh, he asked God, there's a specific prayer that he made. And interestingly enough, this is also the prayer that as Muslims, we say to ourselves or out loud whenever we're going to give a talk. And so I just want to translate it. Moses said, Lord, lift up my heart and ease my task for me. Untie my tongue so that they may understand my words. So that's the prayer. And the verses continue and say, and give me a helper from my family, my brother Aaron. Augment my strength to him. Let him share my task so that we can glorify you much and remember you often. You are always watching over us. And the reason I'm sharing that in particular is because with this particular moment, with COVID-19 happening, this global pandemic, the way that it has exacerbated everything that's happening, all these systems in place, we're seeing it come more into fruition, or more in people's faces, I should say. And it's this beautiful prayer is a reminder that we cannot do this alone. Even though we say that prayer, you know, even as Muslims, and Moses is asking God, instinctively, he asks for a helper. And so in this moment, we're not meant to be solitary. We're not meant to do things on our own. It's how are we in community with one another to combat everything that's happening. And to go back to the pandemic, you know, it's interesting to me that I've seen individuals saying, man, I'm so grateful. I get to be at home. You know, I get to have this moment of seclusion. I get to just be with myself. Yet on the other spectrum, just single mothers, working mothers, single fathers, working fathers, just everybody struggling, you know, 8 kids standing in line to try to get food. because they can't go to the grocery store, there's no money. What it shows me is people are living completely different realities. And so people have been able to be self-reflective, but also I've seen the community come together. And so it's really incredible to see people coming out of their shells, right? The society really implements this individualism, and that's not how we're supposed to be, right? Even as people of faith, we're meant to be in community with each other. And so this particular moment of seeing people protesting, of seeing the education that's happening online, which I'm so grateful people have taken advantage of, it's really remarkable to try to get people to understand on an educational level, on a personal level, but also on a communal level. And so this moment is really unlike any other, to have something that we cannot see completely and drastically change our lives, yet we're coming together. And we're all coming at it differently, but it's really been really incredible to be in community and try to bring about justice, inshallah.
Inshallah, incredible. Thank you, Sister Hazel. And Pastor Ben, same question. Dr. Angela Davis, a profound thinker, intellectual, freedom fighter. She says this particular historical conjuncture holds possibilities for change that we've never before experienced in this country. Would you agree?
I think it does hold possibilities, but I think what we are able to do with those possibilities have more to do with us than they actually have to do with the moment. Kind of in building on what both the brother and sister said, I mean, I think the notion is, how are we making meaning of this moment? And what is the analysis that we are seeking to be engaged in? I think that analysis and our posture towards it has everything to do with what we do with this moment. I think it is obvious, and history presents a picture that most empires don't last beyond 300 years. Certainly, most empires have never gone beyond 500 years. So this country is entering a phase by which it's judged by history that, I would say it's feeling like George Foreman, in a rumble in the jungle in Africa with Ali. Like it's tired, it's been throwing all these haymakers, it's made a lot of noise, but it's wobbling. I think the question that I think we're struggling with, some of us in our community, is, do we see our role as the role to prop up this failing empire, or do we think that this is an opportunity to do something different? When I think about a lot of the great structures that are in the motherland, and even some of the structures that are in Europe, I think about this notion of people developing, 200, 300-year plans for edifices they knew they would never physically step into, but they got up every day and got to work on something they knew they wouldn't step into, but their grandchildren would. And so I wonder, in this moment, what are we trying to build? Are we trying to prop up a failing empire? Are we trying to think about the new kind of community and new structures that we want to, create? And even, what Sister Hazel said about Moses, I was thinking about the narrative of Moses, in our tradition, and talking about that whole notion of, like, him living his whole life and seeing that burning bush that was on fire. But the scripture says that when Moses turned aside from his path to see why the bush was burning, that God spoke to Moses from the bush. And so I'm wondering, like, what are we willing to turn aside from in this moment to actually pay attention to what this moment is offering us, and what's the level of sacrifice that we're willing to give into? What's the level of imagination that we're willing to lean into? What's the kind of risks that we're willing to engage in to really try to create something new? So I think the possibility is there, but I actually think the catalytic lever has a lot to do with us.
Incredible. Thank you all for that. Just a follow-up question. Is this movement being co-opted? Is this moment being watered down? Are the political institutions and actors involved getting it? Or are we getting concessions and not victories, as those that have spoken to this before us? Concessions and not victories. I believe that was Imam Jamil or H. Rep. Brown that said that exact line. Brother Tyson, Amir, what do you think?
Yes, it's being watered down. We don't even really got to go too much deeper in that. It's being watered down, it's being co-opted. I mean, come on now. When you have municipalities all throughout the country, you have governors on some Black Lives Matter. You know, you have people in the executive, legislative branch, judicial branch. Well, yeah, we're about that. You have the institution co-opting the language, and even in that, like what Pastor Ben was saying, we have to be critical in our analysis of that. Is that language really reflective of the revolutionary goals that we say that we really want to see manifested in our society? For a society to just say that, yeah, you have value, or nah, you know what I'm saying? Like it's bigger than that. We need to tear the entire thing down. But the first part of your question, of course, is being co-opted. And then when we analyze the history that we're standing upon, COINTELPRO was a reality. You know what I'm saying? Marcus Garvey, who was the founder of the largest organization in the history of the United States of people of color, the UNIA. The first Black federal agents were hired in order to infiltrate his organization. So when we look at that, I mean, I'm here in Oakland right now. So I'm from the Bay Area, born and raised out here. I'm from San Jose. I live in Oakland now. The protests that have been happening over the past how many ever months, I mean, how many times have we seen provocateurs, saboteurs out there instigating, doing whatever? And then people talking about now what they're seeing at protests, the majority of the folks protesting, white folks. Do they really have a revolutionary focus, or is it something else? It's become something else. You know what I'm saying? And so it's very important for us to be in control of what we're saying we want to see manifest in terms of the changes. That ain't happening on that. And then the other part that you're talking about, concessions, if you don't have very clear, concrete revolutionary goals or revolutionary agenda, and I'm not just saying that to have like rhetoric in the conversation, but if those things are not clear, then you will settle, then you will take concessions, because you don't know what it is that you're going after, that you're trying to accomplish. And so the response is important. The anger, the frustration, all of that is real, is righteous, is justified. But if we don't have a clear understanding of where we're trying to go, we might end up settling for this over here or doing something over here that is not really about advancing that revolutionary agenda. So my analysis of this moment, that is happening. So both of your questions is being co-opted. And yes, there are people who are willing to settle, sell out, mislead and direct people down a path that's not really about revolutionary change or addressing the root causes of the problems that we face. And a lot of that is happening right now. But still, the power of the people and the power of this moment, and if the people have a correct understanding of who they are and what they're able to accomplish, and they move in that way, it's here. It's always here for us.
Powerful. Thank you for that, Brother Tyson. Sister Hazel, do you have something to offer?
Yeah, you know, the first image that came to mind when I read this question, senators kneeling with kente cloth on. I was like, can y'all just get back in the room with the pen and start writing some stuff? Okay. It's just like the image was just like, I don't know what y'all are doing right now. Just get back to work. And so for me, is it being co-opted? Absolutely. They want to have a voice in the movement when they have the power, technically, right? But they're not listening. And so it's just so performative. And even being hyper local. So I live here in Detroit, been here for 6 years. I'm originally from Chicago, but and Chicago and Detroit are very different these days when it comes to the protests. So one thing I've been seeing in Detroit has been, you know, DPD is a little different than in other cities, but mainly seeing white folks from the suburbs coming into the city of Detroit, causing a ruckus. Young Black men have been killed here because of the ruckus of white people, and they get to go back to the suburbs. And so one of the issues that we're having here in Detroit is, how do we get the suburban police departments to do the work that needs to get done? How do we get those white people from West Bloomfield Hills, these very, very wealthy areas, to like stay in their own communities and challenge the system, right? So what Brother Tyson is saying, is it being co-opted? Absolutely. The white people come to Detroit because it's a predominantly Black city. And there's, again, that assumption that because it's mainly Black, it's very violent. When in actuality, statistics have shown here, so many issues happen within the suburban white police departments. And as you know, many historians have said, if Michigan could be below the Mason-Dixon line, it would be below the Mason-Dixon line. You see Confederate flags just leaving Metro Detroit. And so for me, it's just been really frustrating to see white people come here, wreak havoc, have black people have being killed by the police, right? And then they can comfortably go back home and not even challenge their own police departments they're actually paying for, right? And so for me, it's just really been, one, obviously the abolition of police, but also seeing the work that has been done, that has been working, where you see the defunding of the police and refunding of the people, right? Baltimore is currently in process of refunding some of the police budget and refunding it to housing. You see in Oregon, in one particular city, where they have these like mobile units that instead of calling 911, you're able to call this particular unit in order to help with any wellness checks, right? So although it's being co-opted, there are individuals who are like pushing that to the side and they're trying to get work done. So when you see all these different cities where budgets are being reallocated, you know, and refunding of the people, that's great. That's one step to abolition, in my opinion. So it's twofold. Yes, I believe it's being co-opted and very performative, but on the other hand, people are trying to use the moment and use the momentum and power of the people to hold our politicians accountable.
Thank you, Sister Hazel. Pastor Ben, I want to shift just a little bit, but if you want to talk about this, we can come back. What the title of the program is Abolition and Justice. What is abolition and how do you define it?
Yeah, so when I think about abolition, I think about freedom, like absolute freedom to be able to self-determine and create one's own outcome and experience, and have systems and structures that enable us to do so. I think in an example context, abolition is not anything that we have hated in the past. I mean, the abolitionist movement to get rid of slavery is something that is celebrated historically, and yet, you know, when we talk about the abolitionist movement right now to get rid of slave catching agencies called police and concrete plantations called prisons, somehow people struggle to recognize that abolition now is only a continual advance of the abolitionist movement that happened since the heels of the Africans first landed on this side of the world 500 years ago. You know, I mean, I've made the case to folks that the abolitionist movement did not start even when folks got here. The abolitionist movement started when folks got on those ships. African people were laying in the bottom of those ships talking about how do we get away from these crazy people who are killing us and butchering us and raping and destroying us. So I think when I'm talking about abolition, I'm talking about how do we actually create new systems and structures that are rooted in freedom and self-determination of particularly those who've been most marginalized, but new systems, new structures that are really anchored and focused with their end result being around freedom. Just a couple points I just would say real quick around that. Sometimes I feel, and I found this in my own life, so just keeping it all the way solid and 100, right? Because I haven't always been an abolitionist. I'm an emerging abolitionist. I was initially a reformist because I lack the imagination to actually see a world that did not have police and did not have prisons. Some of that was informed by a very toxic theology that I had. Some of that also was informed by kind of the middle class, bourgeois, Black experience that I grew up in. And so that limited my ability to have imagination for this. But I think everybody in their core is an abolitionist because everybody desires to be free. I just think sometimes we lack an imagination for it. And I also think we lack a historical analysis to understand that, you know, the current systems that we have right now that are supposed to, you know, be responsible for creating peace, justice, and security really have only been designed to create peace, justice, and security for white people, and particularly white men who own land. And so I think, you know, if people really want to think about a world in which we are not chased down and othered and incarcerated and brutalized by the government, then that means that all of us have to be abolitionists and then figure out how to create the kind of imagination for creating that new world. We've never lived, this country has never lived in any expression of itself where it has not operated as a terroristic empire that was committing genocide and oppression of people. So this country doesn't know any other version of itself except that version. So to be an abolitionist to me means that we're gonna have to reimagine a very new society that we can pull from a lot of ancestral wisdom in ways in which, you know, indigenous people have practiced different ways of being community, different ways of being society. I think to be an abolitionist is to actually strive for a new world where systems and structures are rooted in freedom.
Incredible. Thank you, Pastor Ben, for that. Sister Hazel, what is abolition and how do you define it?
I really am grateful for Pastor McBride for you uplifting the continual education. I also am still on a journey, right? And so initially I was very much a reformist as well, because I didn't have the imagination, to be quite frank. It was an organizer with PICO who, I'll just never forget, we were doing this this activity of imagining the world. And I still put a jail, but I had it look a little different. Like I drew it. She, instead of mocking me, she challenged me. She said, do you not have the imagination to think of another world? Nobody's here telling you, you have to draw that. So why are you still drawing it? Wow. And I was really embarrassed. And I was like, it works, kind of. And so she just smiled and we talked for a little bit. And I mean, it's been a journey. And for me, abolition is really challenging the status quo. And, you know, being people of faith, all of our examples with every prophet from our holy books challenge the status quo, right? And they were brought to bring, they were sent down to bring end to different injustices of the various societies that they lived through. But there was also the while simultaneously working to redirect and change people's hearts, minds, and actions to actively believe in the one, to actively believe in God. And so for me, abolition is a spiritual action. It is reimagining society. It is, during the time of Moses, Pharaoh was killing newborn boys and keeping the little girls alive. How is that not analogous to today's society? During the time of the prophet, peace be upon him, it was a society where newborn baby girls were being buried alive. And it just was the way that it was. But these two prophets in particular that I'm highlighting, they challenged that. And that is a definition of abolition within our spiritual traditions. And so to put it into today's context, for me, abolition is ending the carceral state. To me, abolition is putting an end to children and to people that are in cages. I know what it's like to grow up visiting my father in Southern Illinois prisons. I know them all. Every weekend. That was exhausting. I was in community with the children of other incarcerated men. And so to be able to look back on my own experiences, one, definitely don't want my sons to have to go through that. Alhamdulillah, they haven't. But the first letter they ever wrote was to a family member who was incarcerated with the number attached to his name, right? And so abolition is being allowed for our children to just be and to thrive and to get out of survival mode and to thrive. Because honestly, so many people within this society are able to thrive because of the color of their skin, because of the way that systems and powers that be have allowed them to be. I mean, if I ask either one of us on this call, all the little things that we do on the daily to be safe. I mean, there have been times where I'm just like, I I'm not going to cross the street right now because there's a whole bunch of men there. I'm a woman, right? I've seen my husband make active decisions. He's like, oh, you know, I can't, I'm not going to get on this elevator with the white woman, you know? And so abolition is really being creative and using the imagination that God gave us in order to reimagine. But also, as Brother Tyson mentioned earlier, it's the reimagining, but having those goals. Like, we got to have the goals. We're constantly in this hamster wheel. And so how can we finally be able to just be, sit, strategize? Because the powers that be are constantly strategizing 50 years in advance.
Thank you for that, Sister Hazel and Pastor Ben. Brother Tyson, I have a question for you along these lines. Is defunding the police abolition? Right, is that the extent of abolition?
Nah, I mean, I question the idea of abolition a lot. And I think that's very important for us to do. We have to have a critical analysis of everything that we're doing, theoretically, ideologically, philosophically, and then of course, in what we develop out of that in terms of praxis. So when we think about the abolition movement or the historical abolition movement here in what is now being referred to as the United States, so we're talking about the 1800s, the movement that I'm more inspired by is the movement that they want to block from people being educated about in colonial educational systems, which is the Haitian Revolution. You feel me? So you had people who were forcibly enslaved, who overthrew the entire system and structure that was responsible for their exploitation and their oppression, and established a free and independent society. 1804, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the new Haitian Constitution, all of that. And then we start moving deeper into the 1800s, and then we have an abolition movement. And this is something that was more tolerated by the U.S. power structure. Okay, you want to have a conversation about eliminating our institution of forced enslavement. All right, cool. We still making our money. We still own our property. We still maintain control over the system of government, which is influenced heavily by this economic system that we've based on the exploitation of everything that you are. And of course, the theft of the land from indigenous brothers and sisters, you feel me? So if we're talking abolition, and again, not focused on root causes, and so that becomes the means, or that becomes the end that we're trying to accomplish, then are we really accomplishing what we need to accomplish to address these issues? So defunding the police, and before that, I would say I'm of the opinion of Malcolm, by any means necessary. And so what that means is, if means A is going to get us our goal, we're going to take that. If means B is going to get us our goal, we'll take that. But we know that we're focused on our goal. And if all of those things don't work, and we got to go to Z, and then we got to start adding some numbers and some letters and some other symbols in there, and we keep pushing, then we're going to keep pushing until we accomplish what we want to accomplish. Defunding the police, that's not freedom and liberation for the people. There's still the military industrial complex. You feel me? There's still the fact that you have old boy Zuckerberg, who just crossed the threshold of being having more than $100 billion. You feel me? And using his power and authority to oppress the people on the African continent, to extract resources for smart devices and all the stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, that has to be part of the understanding, or at least the calculus that we're doing, in order to figure out what should be the moves that we make in order to accomplish the objectives that we set out for. Okay, we can defund the police. If that's a step towards the next bigger goal, all right, cool. But if that's all we're saying, then we're not really looking at the full picture, you feel me? Because it's more than just, the police are an occupying force in our communities off top. So we know that we have to deal with that threat. But they are the enforcers for the people who are trying to run the larger system. So we got to deal with that as well. And so the police, they're part of the military industrial complex, you feel me? So we experience them here in Oakland, or in certain parts of the Bay Area, or in Detroit, or wherever you might be at. All right, but then our brothers and sisters around the world, they're experiencing the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, and all these people where they're at. You know what I'm saying? Them boots are on those grounds. So the analysis has to go beyond just that, because the police, defunding this or defunding that is a piece of a much larger puzzle, which represents the entire systemic oppression and exploitation that our people are experiencing here in the United States and beyond. So if abolition is not including that in the definition, then it might be a win. And as our revolutionary comrade, Amilcar Cabral would say, you know what I'm saying? We don't accept no easy victories. You know what I'm saying? Like, we need to go bigger than that. We're trying to address the root causes. And that's why I'm saying the abolition movement of the 1800s, we had the Haitian Revolution as well. Let's be about that. Let's make sure that that spirit is driving what we have. Because we don't want to end up with a situation where now we just have Black and brown faces who are now running the thing, but they're still oppressing the people, or being oppressed by the folks that control the majority of the wealth and the majority of the property throughout the world through force.
Powerful. Pastor Ben, I think that you had something that you wanted to share.
Yeah, no, I was just, I feel inspired by what, the both of y'all were saying. And I do think, to Tyson's point, I mean, I think it's important for us to think about all of these initiatives, not as standalone initiatives, but as pieces, as I think the metaphor he was using, multiple pieces of a larger puzzle. But I think in order to get there together, I think we have to have a shared analysis around where it is that we're trying to get. Are we simply trying to become the new white people? Like, this has been a part of the critique that I've been saying in the movement. Like, what is success? Are we trying to become the new white people? And what I mean by that, in the sense of that we now have the power to oppress others, or are we trying to create something fundamentally different? Because that then is going to inform how we need to participate. And I think, the example of thinking about abolition versus the revolution, excuse me, 1800s, I think is a great example. And then, I think we have to learn from history, right? And recognize that in the abolition movement before, the failure of it really came in the Reconstruction period, and how when they first got Reconstruction, ultimately it failed because they were able to change a couple systems and structures, but they didn't really deal with the deep spiritual issue that was actually informing the systems and structures. And so they just recreated themselves. And 20 to 30 years after slavery was ended, it was totally recreated with new systems of Jim Crow. And within 40 years, if you were poor and Black, you were back on the plantation under vagrancy laws, or you were swinging from trees, or you were running scared, across the South or across the country. And then I think the second Reconstruction, in terms of civil rights, and the 50s and the 60s movement failed because, there's a whole lot of reasons, I think, why we can understand how that failed. So to me, we need to be very clear around learning, why did these first two iterations of Reconstruction as a part of abolition fail, and how might that inform how we should be participating today? The last thing I would just say on it is also, I also think we're in a dynamic where anti-Blackness is a different thing than just racism, and I don't think that analysis is always held. And if we're not going to center anti-Blackness as the lens by which we need to answer these questions about abolition or revolution, then what we end up doing is disappearing the very construct that this whole country is built on. Because it wasn't just built on racism or othering, but it was built particularly on anti-Blackness. And so I think the way in which we need to, in a multiracial way, help everyone, both immigrant populations and non-Black folks of color, understand that their freedom is tied up in the freedom of the African and the destruction of anti-Blackness as an ideology, system, and structure. If we're all going to get free, I think it's going to be because we do the work of all of us recognizing that undoing structural anti-Blackness is how you create the conditions of undoing Islamophobia and anti-immigrant sentiment and all the other different isms that, restrict people's ability to show up in their full humanity. So my hope is that we can learn, from the history, and not just get caught up with the latest, tagline that's out there, because, as y'all said earlier, this movement is already being co-opted. And like, Minister Malcolm said, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing.
Yes,
and
sir.
it's just killing me to see that, you know, it seems like some of us are just so excited that the white folks are protesting and that Roger Goodell said Black Lives Matter and Colin still ain't got no job. And we so easily get distracted. And so I think, you know, we got to figure out how to have a shared analysis around what it is that we're really trying to destroy and what it is that we really want to build.
Powerful. I do want to offer that often conversations and discussions on police violence and abolition are often centered around the experiences of Black and Latinx men, and that the voices of other groups like Black women and brown women and indigenous folks are not centered. And so I say this to say that it is a reality on this panel that we don't have the voice of a Black woman, and that's a responsibility on me as an organizer. And for me, I'm making a promise that this will not be a one-off conversation, that this is a commitment to many conversations and movement building and engagement and uncomfortable sort of organizing, right? And a push, you know, of our community's sort of intellectual place and spiritual place, and also organizing. And so on this though, are there people in our communities who are being who are alienated, and in what ways are we failing them and failing the movement in general? And I want to ask you know, anybody to go ahead and speak on that. So I won't pick somebody in particular.
I'll say this real quick and then I'm gonna be quiet because I've been taking up a lot of space. I am still concerned in this moment and like past moments that we are not centering the people who are closest to the pain around a lot of these issues. During the Ferguson uprising, it was poor Black people, and particularly poor Black young people, that started that revolution and that movement. And I get concerned that young Black people who are not acclimated to white supremacy, like they have not learned how to behave in the ways in which many of us have learned how to behave around white supremacy and talk the talk, are being disappeared in this movement. And my hope is that we can find ways to ensure that we keep space for them to be present.
I mean, thank you.
I completely agree with that. You know, it's really uplifting the people who are directly impacted to be able to push and help and provide the resources that many of us have access to, whether through foundations with monies, whether that's through the different networks that we have on a national scale. It's really uplifting the voices of those who, as Pastor McBride said, right? People are disappearing and they're being murdered, right? And as you all saw earlier with protests happening in the last few months, people kept saying, don't post pictures. Don't post pictures of the protests, or at least hide the faces of the individuals that are protesting. And that's a reality with the surveillance state that we're in, that so many of our young people have been murdered, the young people from the Ferguson uprising. And so how do we center those voices while also making sure and ensuring that they are safe as well?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And I would also say, I think something that we've touched on a few times in this conversation already, the conversation has largely, and this is my analysis of it, been shaped by these new institutions, internet, social media is an institution, academia, which is a representation or an outgrowth of this colonial empire. And there's language, and then there are new expectations or actions that are being put on a certain segment of the population, and things, they carry weight. I mean, this institution knows how to use its leverage and its force in order to get people to do what it wants them to do. And so in this conversation, like I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, all of that stuff, right? So we were talking about revolution. The conversation has shifted dramatically in terms of what people are being forced into or what people are being exposed to. And, Sister Hazel and Pastor Ben were talking about that as well. And what we we are being forced to imagine as new possibilities for our people or for this society. So I think that's something that for real is being left out of that conversation. That revolutionary voice, that righteous revolutionary voice, that righteous revolutionary thought, that righteous revolutionary action, which is focused on dismantling the entire thing. We have empirical data which states that for centuries, these systems run by these people do not work. We don't need to reform them. We don't need to find ways to just change out certain pieces of them, break the whole thing down, and let's build something else that has these principles that we want to see in them. And so I think that's something that is excluded from the conversation. And that energy that energy comes a lot from, the folks that Pastor Ben was talking about. You get these brothers and sisters, or how folks identify from certain neighborhoods, they with that off top, but then not given the platform or not given the opportunity to express themselves, articulate their thoughts, their desires, what they want to see happen. And then it becomes what it is. And then you have certain talking heads who are being put in the positions of leadership or taking up more space than what they should be taking. And then we see what we see. So I think that's an important part of the conversation too, of what's being excluded, that revolutionary fervor that is righteous and is a part of all the spiritual traditions and the historical traditions that many of us come from.
Powerful. I want to, because y'all touched on this at various points in this conversation around dreaming and reimagining, and this point around radical imagination and reimagination. So I'm hoping that we can imagine a little bit what is possible through abolition, what is possible through revolutionary work, and where do you hope that imagination can take us, and where do you hope our communities are in the next 50 years? That's a long time. It's a long time.
You said 50 or 15?
Let's say 50.
Having conversations with individuals who have been really scared on the concept of what defunding the police looks like. I shared this quote a lot with them, just to, abolition seemed too extreme for them. So I shared this with a quote from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And she was asked, what does an America with defunded police look like to you? And her answer was, it looks like a suburb. Affluent white communities already living in a world where they choose to fund youth, health, housing, etc., more than they fund the police. These communities have lower crime rates, not because they have more police, but because they have more resources to support healthy society in a way that reduces crime. And I shared that with them because it got them thinking. But I also want to uplift what Pastor Ben said. It's like, our revolution is not to try to become white and emulate what a white society would look like. But in having the conversations with individuals on to just reimagine it, and it allowed people to think of like, well, there's policies that have been put in place in order to prevent us from moving forward. We're constantly being over-policed. Going back to the militarization piece, right? Like our police department is trained by the IDF. Our police departments, trained by the Israeli Defense Forces. Like that, to even put it on a global scale. And so this whole reimagination piece is having conversations with people who may not agree with me, right? I'll speak for myself. Having conversations with people who may not agree with me, who think that, for example, the police are meant to protect, when in actuality, it's twofold. It's one, policies are made in order to legitimize those massive budgets that over surveil our communities. And so how do we use the ballot in order to get the right people into office? But how do we also dismantle the systems that are currently in place? And they got to go hand in hand. And the reimagination piece is is overwhelmingly hopeful, but it's also overwhelming because it's like, when have we had a chance to think 50 years in advance? I remember during a presentation, someone had mentioned how in major universities across the country, there's two departments that are predominantly very conservative, and one of them is the economics department, right? And so by being able to put forces of conservative thinking within the universities, it's affected us, well over 50 years later. How do we get together in order to have a 50-year plan and make it hyper local for all of our communities? I mean, I think that'd be absolutely beautiful. I think it's critical. And my question is, when are we gonna sit down and have those conversations? But first, by uplifting and the voices that are like not even on this call, right? I'm directly impacted in a different way. So it's overwhelming, but it's hopeful. And definitely the importance of learning history and learning from history and our own histories. Like when I hear, and I've been in conversations and people want to start with the Black experience starts at slavery, I'm like, no. What was happening in Africa? There's civilizations that were happening. The narrative doesn't just start there. There's a whole other history. And that's empowering when we get to know who we are and where we come from and our own histories, and not allowed to even learn history from a very Eurocentric viewpoint. So I know that was kind of all over the place, but it's just so many different things on what reimagining looks like. And for me, I've just been on this journey of helping individuals learn themselves, learn their own histories, including my own. And with that, there's a sense of empowerment and being conscious of God, right? Like this, I'm a visible Muslim woman. I practice my faith, and I'm constantly reminded how in the FBI files, Malcolm X was not the FBI did not, and COINTELPRO, they did not write that he was a charismatic leader. They wrote that he was a Messiah. There is a reason, right? Why they wrote that he was a Messiah, because he was a man that believed in God, and he prayed, and he knew he was going to go out in God's time, but he was going to make his time on earth matter. And so that always stands out to me, that we need to go hand in hand, that revolution needs to happen. We need to learn our histories, but also being very grounded in our faith practice and what that means in order to really be able to move forward and be mobilizing ourselves and our people.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Sister Hazel, for all of that. I realize that we are sort of at the end of this conversation, and so I want to name that, and I want to thank those folks that have been on the call with us. I want to give space to Pastor Ben and Brother Tyson, to maybe answer that question if they want to. Where
I'll be
do
brief,
you hope?
Pastor
Yeah,
Ben.
please.
So I'm going to say free, you know what I'm saying? Self-determining people with the ability to, with the land in the possession of the people, with the resources of this world in possession of the people, and they do it in a just and an equitable way that brings balance back to it. These people have erected systems that have not only killed off people, but it's killing the planet. You know what I'm saying? So free, self-determining, safe, healthy, with housing, food, quality education for the people. And we find the balance that we're supposed to have with ourselves and with the world around us. And that is not something that's going to come from these Western systems. They do not know how to do that. And they're trying to take everybody with them on this journey to destroy ourselves and destroy the world. So now I don't want to see that. And in 50 years, I hope our people are free, that they are free, that they're not afraid to stand up and truly fight for the freedom and the liberation that we all deserve. Allah.
Yeah, I would say in 50 years, I've been thinking about this since you said it. That's a big question. In 50 years, I'd love to see the end of whiteness. Not white people, but whiteness, because I think whiteness is the system that actually capitalism is rooted in, patriarchy and its toxic ways are rooted in. And so I'd like to see the end of whiteness. And you said 50 years. In half of that, in 2045, this country will be majority minority for the first time in the, not actually in its history, because there was a period where there actually were more African folks here than white folks in some of those earlier days. It's just we were all enslaved. But this country in its functional way will be majority minority. And so my hope is that we do work over the next 25 years to ensure that when we get to that moment, we are prepared. Because if you would have talked to the Italians of the early 1900s and told them that one day whiteness would be extended to them, they would have told you were crazy, because they were not included in the in whiteness when they first arrived. Neither were the Irish, neither were the Jewish, neither were our Arab relatives. None of them were included, or there was no presumption into having access to whiteness. And that changed for the Italians, and it changed for the Irish, and it changed for the Jewish relatives. And so what the history of this country suggests is that when whiteness is threatened, it extends whiteness to those who have not been considered white in order to strengthen its position against both the Black and the indigenous and whomever else it will other. And so my hope, if we're going to end whiteness, to me, that means that over the next 25 years, the kind of deep relational and bridging work between all of the marginalized and oppressed people who are currently victims of whiteness, we must come together. The Black, the brown, the Arab, the Muslim, the Christian, the Jew, the person of no faith, the humanist, we must all come together and ensure that in 25 years, none of us are going to take that whiteness check. And I think if we can end whiteness, then we really have an opportunity to live into what I've heard Brother Tyson and Sister Hazel lift up. But as long as whiteness is ruling, I fear that we will not prevail. I'll close with this story. I was over in Palestine, in the West Bank, a little bit off of Ramallah. And I was over there and I was doing some consulting. This is before Mike Brown, over in 2014. And I was over there trying to help these white folks who were going, make the parallels between what's happening over to our Palestinian relatives and what is happening over here in this country. And we were in a refugee camp, and beautiful little Palestinian girl came running out. We were all standing there, and she looked at all the white people. She said, "American?" They said, "Yeah." She said, "American?" Said, "Yeah." Said, "American." She went through, she got to me, she pointed to me, she said, "You know American." And the deep part of that moment is, I said, anti-Blackness is so powerful that even a young Palestinian girl in a refugee camp, whiteness has made its way all the way over there to tell her that I don't belong here. And so my hope is that we can do work together to ensure that in 25 years, when whiteness for the first time numerically will be challenged, we will have a rope-a-dope Ali punch to send George Foreman whiteness to its knees.
Wow, 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 wow. Allah. Thank you for that, y'all. I wanna end with this question. What advice can you leave young people on their educational spiritual journey? Because this fight is going to be a long fight, and it will be strategic and intentional and creative, and it will require heart and soul and an investment of the heart and the body and the mind and the wealth. What advice do you have for folks who are in this moment being radicalized, right? Digging at the roots of things and making sense of our world and consuming all of these things that they've sort of been sort of made invisible to, and from. What advice do you have for those folks on both their educational and spiritual journeys? And I want to ask Brother Tyson to maybe lead us in that.
Right on, I'll jump into that. I think what both Pastor Ben and Sister Hazel said, they brought up examples from our understandings and our experiences with these traditions. We come from traditions that are moral, are ethical, and have that revolutionary fire and fervor in them. And sadly, in this moment, or we can say in past moments, some of those aspects haven't been highlighted as much. Like that stuff is a part of our traditions. And so it can't only be fasting, praying, being good to your brother or sister, wanting for your significant other or your other what you want for yourself. Those are beautiful things. But what goes into that as well is we want freedom for our people. We want justice for our people. And if that's not happening, we have to do what we can in order to make that a reality. And so another part that I think came up in our conversation as well is because we exist in a colonial society, and that colonial society is interested in perpetuating itself, we're not exposed to the information that we should be exposed to. We need to know our revolutionary history, whether it comes from a spiritual tradition or it comes from just the tradition of the people. And then the understanding of that, the deeper understanding of that is there's no separation of those things for us when we look at ourselves outside of the colonial lens. We are people of faith, but we live. Our faith is part of how we live. Our faith is part of how we struggle. Our faith is part of how we fight for our freedom and liberation. You know what I'm saying? And so like really understanding what that stuff looks like. If you're not familiar with the Haitian Revolution, we need to study that. If we're not familiar with various revolutionary movements on the African continent, Asia, South America, the Caribbean, North America, all of that, we need to know that history as deeply as we can and pull the lessons and the wisdom from that, and then figure out how we can manifest that in this present day, and then be focused on the true goals and objectives of what we're trying to accomplish and move with that understanding. And we don't stop until we accomplish what we set out to do.
Powerful. Thank you, Brother Tyson. Pastor Ben, what advice do you have for young people on their educational and spiritual journeys?
Yeah, concisely, I would just say, don't become a caricature of white supremacy. Let the Most High shape you, lead you to be who it is that you are. Challenge what it is that we are taught, because the true history is not offered to us. And I think, as Tyson said, we should continue to look to our traditions and look for the opportunities to look to the intersectional traditions. And I think, you know, particularly as I've reflected on the last 50, 60 years, I think I would encourage young folks to learn from the history. Don't be ahistorical, learn from the history. Let's look to the leadership, particularly from the Black Muslim movements of the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, when my foremothers and fathers in the Black Christian tradition were soft as jello in terms of their analysis to really confront the reality of white supremacy. It was the fierce tenacity of the Black Muslim movement that lived at that intersection of confronting white supremacy. So I would just encourage us to learn from the traditions. We don't have to be muzzled by them, but they can certainly serve as fuel to catalyze us. So I just would encourage us to not be caricatures. Let's learn from history and be catalyzed by our ancestors.
Sister Hazel, the floor is yours. What advice do you have for young folks on their educational and spiritual journeys?
You know, Brother Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Brother Malcolm X, he really reminds us to be patient with one another. And there's this quote that I absolutely love and I hold dear to my heart. And this is something that I would love our young people to also embody. And he said, "Don't be in a hurry to condemn because he doesn't do what you do or think as you think or as fast. There was a time when you didn't know what you know today." And that patience piece goes back to being grounded. It goes back to being open to learning and learning from our elders so that we don't reinvent the wheel and we don't start from scratch. Like, things have been happening, and how do we learn from our elders? Like, we're communities to come together. And also, organizing is a sacred trust. It's not easy, it's difficult, and it's a sacred trust that our communities have our communities are holding us accountable, right? And we're holding one another accountable. And there's this verse from the Holy Quran where, you know, where Allah says in chapter 4, verse 135, where he says, "O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves, your parents, and relatives." And the reason why I am particularly uplifting that is because when it comes to, you know, learning about the moment for our young people and they want to get, you know, want to get acclimated, it's all right, start with your family. Learn the difference between an ally and being an accomplice. And what does that mean? And so to always remain humble and to remember, just like that verse says, is standing against yourself, even stand up for justice, even if it's against yourselves, your parents and relatives. And I love how it says parents and relatives, because sometimes, you know, we'll go beyond them and go into community and be like, oh, I'm an ally or I'm an accomplice. But really having those tough conversations starts at home. Organizing starts at home. And being able to work and be on a journey with individuals to help change mindsets is absolutely critical, because the system is made up of individuals and individuals make up the system. And so we have to start one-to-one, and also at the same time being able to start from the systems down. But always be ready to learn and listen and actively listen, and being able to be grounded in whatever spiritual practice or not. But I really also want to uplift the importance of learning history and our history, not history through a Eurocentric lens, because it creates cultural genocide, just as Pastor Ben said. And that cultural genocide is, we're not going to know who we are. If we don't know who we are, how are we going to be able to stand up against the powers that be and this system that is meant to oppress us?
SubhanAllah, what a way to end and conclude this program. I really, really thank you for all that you've brought to this conversation, but most importantly, for the work that y'all do, and more important than that, for who you are, and for your commitments to love and to community. I am really, really honored to be in community with you and to have learned from you in my own journey. For folks that have tuned into this conversation through Zoom, it was a wholesome one. It was an intimate one. So I thank you. For folks that may be seeing this video later at some point, the objective of this conversation is that you, as the listener, are inspired to sustain your love for your community, for one another, that you commit your heart and your mind to those principles and practice of justice work. Pursuing justice, revolutionary work, is a commitment of a lifetime of struggle. And I've learned this actually from Sister Hazel, that hope is not a strategy. That we actually have to look at the work itself and essentially just calling on hope and calling on love as principles isn't enough. We got to commit to the work itself. I believe that this movement is intersectional, and it's young people, young Black folks that are sustaining that fire, that love, that sweetness of a world that can hold all our pain and our hopes. And our justice, this moment and this movement seeks to address those roots of that suffering and the structures in place, intentionally working to suppress the voice and organizing of our people. Thank you again, Pastor Ben, Brother Tyson, Sister Hazel, for that love and that power and that commitment that y'all have brought to this conversation. I appreciate you, and I look forward to being in community with you on the ground to do this work. And if there's anything that you want to offer as we close, the floor is yours. If not, would it be okay to end with a prayer? Wonderful. So in the Muslim tradition, we raise our hands. So follow along if that's okay. O Allah, Master and Sustainer of the heavens and the earth, Creator and Giver of life, we ask you with your most beautiful names, the most gracious, the most merciful, to fill our hearts with your light that never diminishes, to make us among the good, among the pious, among the righteous, among the active, among the questioners and the conscious and the thinkers for justice always. O Allah, forgive our brothers and our sisters, our family and our friends, those in our presence and those who have passed. You are Allah near to us. You answer the call of those that call upon you. O Allah, guide us and place us in the company of those that you have guided. Protect us from pain and sickness and sadness, and keep us in the company of those that you have protected. Forgive us and keep us in the company of those that you have forgiven. O Allah, keep us among the righteous. Keep us in the company of those that have committed their hearts and their minds and their bodies to revolutionary work. Keep us committed to revolutionary work. Keep us committed to justice work, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Oh Allah, you know that these folks who are on this call today, the Zoom call, Pastor Ben and Sister Hazel and Brother Tyson, that they come to this work from a place of love, and they've committed their work to you and as a service and a worship to you. So increase this love, increase this worship, and give us the patience, and give them the patience and the wisdom to confront the forces of injustice, and patience with patience and determination and an unwavering commitment. Oh Allah, make us like the rain that we bring life to barren earth. Ameen. Thank you, y'all, and have a wonderful night.